Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Sally Walker. Sally Walker is a hormone and slow age expert. I asked her if she wanted to use the term anti-aging, and she says, no, it's really slow aging. And you can find out more about Sally Walker and her wonderful work at her website, sally-walker.com. And she's coming to us today from the gorgeous Canary Islands. Welcome, Sally Walker.
Thank you, Catherine. It's great to be here.
So for our audience, because we're talking about slow aging, anti-aging, Sally and I were talking before we started. I'm 62. Sally, you are 65?
65, yep.
Yes. And I remember years ago interviewing this lady, and she's like, oh, I'm 45 years old, you know. I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. And so we're the older babes. So if you are an older babe or an aging babe and you want to learn how to have a healthy thyroid, today, this is what you're going to want to hear. So Sally Walker, what exactly is the thyroid gland? What does it do, and which hormones does it produce?
Well, the thyroid gland is located in the throat here. So it's just behind your Adam's apple, a little gland there. And it is very, very important because it controls something we call metabolism. So basically what it does, it controls how much energy we produce, but it's controlling how many calories we are really burning. So calories from carbohydrates, calories from proteins, calories from fat. So it's all of them, and that's basically what it's controlling. So it's controlling at the end of the day how much energy you have, and the energy you're going to use on your physical activities, your mental and emotional activities. So everything. It's very important. Little gland there. Very important indeed.
And you know,
the hormones, and it produces hormones. Okay, so this is a good one, isn't it? Because the hormones which the thyroid gland produces are primarily the one we call for thyroxine, which is called T4. Okay, that's what it primarily produces. It produces a little bit of a hormone called T3, but most of the T3 is produced other places in the body, especially the liver. And the T3 is the most active, the most important of the hormones. So many of the ladies possibly listening, also the men, but it seems to be more of a ladies' issue, this one, is a hormone called TSH. Now, TSH is not produced in the thyroid, it's actually produced in the brain, in the pituitary gland. So really, the thyroid gland is producing the hormone T4 and a little bit of T3.
Okay, great answer. Now, I know many people listening may go, oh my gosh, you know, I'm getting older, I'm premenopausal, I'm menopausal, I'm postmenopausal, my metabolism has slowed down. And I can remember in my 40s getting my metabolism scientifically tested. And they told me at the time that if I ate more than 1,200 calories a day, I would gain weight. I was like, oh my God. So if you're somebody who feels like your metabolism has slowed down, then you want to keep listening to what Sally Walker, the hormone and the slow age expert, has to say, because that is awful. I'm like, oh my God, I have to eat only 1,200 calories or I will gain weight. Are you kidding? But I healed my metabolism and now I can eat normally. And I don't, at age 62, I don't worry about what I weigh, about my weight, what I eat, and I can wear a 2-piece bathing suit and not be humiliated. So this is very important to heal your metabolism. Now, Sally Walker, what is the difference between hyper and hypothyroidism?
Well, as the words really suggest, in the hyper, you've got a thyroid or let's put it rather than thyroid, you've got a metabolism which is overactive. And then in the hypos, you've got a metabolism which is underactive. So I call the hypers, I call them for the what syndrome, so wired all the time. And then I call the hypos for the tat syndrome, tired all the time. Okay, so if you feel that you're someone who's wired all the time, you can't sit still, and you're talking, all this kind of thing, and your heart is racing and you're sweating, and you're one of these people that eat mountains of food, but you never put on so much as a gram, then you might have a hyperactive metabolism, thyroid. But if you're the opposite, you're tired all the time, you're depressed, and you're eating salad leaves, but you're putting on loads of kilos, then you might be someone who has a hypo, a low functioning thyroid or metabolism.
Now,
so that's the difference.
Okay, now Sally Walker, what is the autoimmune conditions that affect our thyroid? Because many people go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, you've got autoimmune thyroiditis.
Yeah, so there's a couple of immune diseases. One of them is called Graves, and that's the one connected with the hyper. So this is the one that's going to make your thyroid overactive. And then the opposite one is called Hashimoto's. Lovely name, really, Hashimoto's. Yeah, it's called Hashimoto's, and that's connected with the hypos. But you can be hypo without having the autoimmune. You could also be hyper without having the autoimmune, but it is less likely. Well, you can, but very often the hypers are Graves, but very often the hypos are not Hashimoto's.
And I had personal experience with this because years ago I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. I was on I was diagnosed Hashimoto's, also hypothyroid. And for many years I took Synthroid, which is artificial T4. Now, I have to say at age 62, I'm on 0 drugs, 0 medication. And I healed my thyroid, which you can do. And it's really worth doing. And I know
it absolutely is.
Yeah, and I know Sally Walker, you do this with clients, is you help people heal their thyroid. Now, of course, we're people, we're men and women, and we have other hormones. Do other hormones affect our thyroid function?
Absolutely. And both sexes can get problems with their thyroid, but it is more typically seen or commonly seen in ladies. And it often starts in the perimenopausal journey. So we don't know that estrogens and progesterones, which they go out of balance, they're on the decline in our perimenopausal time. And this can have a knock-on effect on the thyroid. So I always recommend my perimenopausal ladies to get their thyroid checked, because many of these symptoms can resemble the perimenopausal symptoms. So you go to the doctor, you're 45 years of age, and you've got sort of symptoms, you're a bit depressed and putting on weight and all this kind of thing. And the doc says, oh, it's normal, you're perimenopausal, and doesn't look at the thyroid, where perhaps it was actually the thyroid that needs some focus to assist with some of these symptoms. So it is more ladies than men, but both can get it, and it's very important to really get it tested. So the other hormones which will affect the thyroid function. So we've got this hormone T4, which is produced in your thyroid, but it's the conversion of it to T3, which is particularly important, because we need the T3, because that's the one which really talks to the little parts in your cells that produce the energy. And that conversion can be the problem. So I have many ladies who get on the synthetic T4s. This is sort of the standard treatment. If you have low thyroid, we're going to give you more T4. But if your challenge is you can't convert to T3, taking more T4 doesn't necessarily help. So we need to have a look at that conversion. And that conversion can be very, very much affected by the hormone cortisol, or what we call stress, which will actually decrease the conversion to T3. So that plays a role. Insulin will also affect, so the condition like type 2 diabetes will also affect the conversion of T4 to T3. So it's not just cut and dry that, oh, you've got a hypo or you've got a hyper, and we're going to go in and manipulate the T4. It's not just a question of that. There could be many other hormones that need addressing. And unfortunately, this is not always addressed, unfortunately, unless you go to somebody who works a little bit more holistically, like myself, for example.
Yes. And on a personal note, I remember during the years when I did take Synthroid, you know, when you're on a drug, you have to go back and you have to have your levels tested and talk to the doctor. And I remember I literally actually didn't feel any better on Synthroid. And it was interesting. But what I learned is that your body converts T4 into T3 in your liver. So if you've got any liver function problems, then your body can't make that conversion. And Sally Walker was talking about the stress hormone cortisol. Now, in my work as a medical intuitive healer, you know, somebody actually just asked me about their thyroid yesterday. And I said, it's not your thyroid that's the problem. It's your stress, because there's an inverse relationship between your cortisol and your thyroid function hormones. And the higher your cortisol, the lower your thyroid function is going to be. Also, when you're stressed, when you're highly stressed, and many of us are, your body produces an actual hormone called reverse T3, which acts like the brakes. So many people are driving with the brakes on. They're driving their car, they're living their life, they're maybe taking T4, Synthroid, and they're so stressed. It's like they've got the gas and the brakes on at the same time, and
absolutely
still struggling with their metabolism, still struggling with their weight and their energy. So very, very important. So you've got the two stress hormones, cortisol and also adrenaline. And I remember years ago, I asked my yoga class, there was a little joke. I'm very blessed because I teach yoga now 8 times a week. And there was a little test on the internet. It's like, how do you know if you're running on adrenaline? And one of the questions I asked everybody, did you break the speed limit on the way to yoga class? and many of us are just so accustomed to living our life in this constant stress, and we don't appreciate what effect that has on our hormones, running down and using up our hormones, and lowering our thyroid function. Now, Sally Walker, if somebody's listening to this and suspecting, gosh, you know, I don't think my metabolism is working properly, how would someone know if they have a hyperthyroid condition? So running too fast.
Yeah, so the first place to go is to your doctor and get the classical blood tests done, because they do help. They will give a picture, and he will measure typically, or he or she will measure typically the TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is a hormone which is produced in the pituitary, and it's sent to the thyroid gland, telling it to make T4, basically. So if you have a thyroid which is overactive, the level of the message coming from the pituitary will be low. So you're going to have a low level of TSH. So TSH has a range somewhere between 0.4 and maybe 4 international units per liter. It'll be on the lower end. It might even have gone under the 0.4 or the 0.3 or the 0.2, whatever it is in the lab that you're using. So if it's gone under there, then you definitely have a hyperthyroid. The doctor will also measure the levels of T4. This will give a big indication as well. But related to the hypers, I think TSH is a very good one to use, because if it goes low, then it's telling you that the thyroid is going crazy. So yeah, it's producing too much T4 for some reason.
And if you're I also want to make a comment, because about a month ago, I did a medical intuitive reading on a client in Costa Rica, and her hair was falling out. And I told her, I said, you're taking too much thyroid medication. And people, people think, oh, I'm gaining a little weight, I'm premenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal. I'll go to my doctor and ask for thyroid medication. Well, if you take too much thyroid medication, your heart can go into this speeded up state and no one can stop it. You really actually don't want to take too much thyroid medicine. It's a big problem. And in my client's case, her hair was literally falling out in clumps. So there's real problems from taking too much thyroid medication and putting yourself inadvertently into a hyper state. Now, Sally Walker, if someone's listening to this program and think, well, I'm not too hyper, I'm exhausted, I'm depressed, no matter how little I eat, I can't lose weight. How can someone tell if their thyroid is in a hypo state?
See, that is a little bit more, on paper it's not more difficult, but in practice it possibly is. But it'll be the same blood tests that you would start with your GP. So again, the TSH. So the TSH now will be higher. So think of it, I like to think of it like your thyroid gland is the children, and mum is giving a message to the children saying, please stop what you're doing. And if the children don't listen, then mum repeats herself. And if they still don't listen, then she will maybe start shouting. So the more message which is coming from the thyroid, coming from the hypothalamus, from the pituitary to the thyroid, then the less this is working. But unfortunately, it is not always that simple, because the TSH, the message can be okay, but you still got a thyroid that isn't functioning properly, because it's not the production of the T4, it's the conversion to the T3 where the problem is. So the doctors will typically measure TSH and they'll measure the T4, but they don't typically measure the T3. And unfortunately, if your TSH is within range, now the range, as I said before, somewhere sort of maybe between 0.3 and 4.0. So if your number is 3.99, you're going to be within range, and many doctors will say you're fine, you're within range, but you're possibly not. When I work with my clients, I like to see their TSH around 1. So if you're anything above 2, then this is going to be an indication that the thyroid is not functioning as well as it could do. But it might be fine, and your T4 might be reasonable, but you might have a low T3. And unless you get it tested, then you don't know. But if your TSH is reasonable and your T4 is reasonable, your doctor is not going to help you with this. You then need to do some private testing, which can be blood, but could also be urine. And there are many other tests you can do. So you start asking the questions, why am I hyper? Or why am I hypo? Is it something to do with iodine? Is it something to do with heavy metals? There could be different reasons. Is it something to do with I'm nutrient deficient? There could be many reasons why. So that could be a way of testing as well.
Yes, and everybody listen on, because we're definitely going to be talking about natural ways to heal your thyroid. Now, I want to make a comment also about hypothyroidism and depression. 2 of my 10 books are about how to heal depression without drugs. And both of those books have extensive chapters about the connection between depression and hypothyroidism. And there could be, again, as we're discussing, many reasons that your thyroid has gone into a hypo state. But keep in mind that many people who are on antidepressants and they're in a low thyroid state, they're taking the antidepressants to feel better mentally, emotionally, and the antidepressants aren't making any difference because of the thyroid state, right? And I'm sure you see that every day in your practice, Sally Walker, right?
Absolutely. I like to think of it as like this, that the thyroid hormones are helping every single cell in your body make energy, and every single cell has a particular job. So this is why there are so many symptoms for low or high thyroid. So if you're high, you're making too much energy, but it's the low energy production which seems to give the biggest concerns, at least, or is not being treated properly. So if your brain cells are not producing enough energy to do their jobs, which is possibly making the neurotransmitters, it could be serotonin, it could be dopamine, etc., then you are going to have a change in your emotional state.
For sure. And in my most recent book about how to heal depression without drugs is called Banish the Blues Now. And so I'm going to give everybody a little mini lecture here about the brain. So you have a brain, you know that. Inside your brain, you have different organs. You've got your hypothalamus, which is like the control tower at the airport. And you've got your pituitary gland. Now, your pituitary gland, like Sally says, it's like the mother, and it governs your thyroid and also your adrenal glands. And the latest research about depression and anxiety is that it's a dysregulation of what's called the HPA axis. And here at the Natural Healing Show, we've even had experts in recovering from trauma who talk about when you're under chronic severe stress for prolonged periods of time, there's so much stress coming into the brain that the HPA axis goes overloaded and the HPT axis goes overloaded. So this severe, chronic, unrelenting stress can cause your brain to malfunction and your thyroid and your adrenals to malfunction. And when you go into a chronic hypo state, then you get conditions like adrenal burnout. And one of my 10 books is also called Unlimited Energy Now. And that's all about how to heal your adrenal glands and how to have more energy on all the levels. So all of this is completely interrelated. So it's not just that you notice, wow, my pants are getting a little tight and I'm not eating anything. And I remember part of the reason why I studied this was both for my own benefit, but I would have clients come into my office, and I'm sure this happens to you every day, where they come into my office, they show me their food diaries, and they're not eating anything. And then they're exercising an hour every day, and they're running up and down the mountain and doing HIIT training, and they've got these personal trainers, and nothing is happening. Their body stays the same. So what are some of the stories that you can relate from your own clients, Sally, about people with unresolved thyroid issues?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What you're saying there, typically seeing people's food diaries and lifestyle diaries, and people often are very good at controlling how much they eat and what they eat. And also have a reasonable exercise program daily, etc., but it's still not functioning. They're still not burning fat, or they're still not losing weight, etc. And I think possibly this is what the biggest thing everyone sees who works with people with nutritional problems or weight problems. This is what we see. And I was actually on an obesity panel the other week, where I was asked to be on this panel of experts. And what we were talking about, and this I find very interesting because it is relatively new as well, but there's a lot of focus on the area you're talking about, the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus, you call it the control tower, I call it the commander-in-chief. But it is, this needs to have the focus, because this is the one which is actually dictating what happens in the pituitary and what then happens in the rest of the body, kind of thing. So what they were looking at with the obesity is there's the new drug on the market. So I'm not saying we have to do the drugs, but there is a drug on the market, and it is a hormone, and it's called GLP-1. And it was actually created for type 2 diabetics because it has a very important effect on blood sugar and insulin. So this hormone is produced in the intestinal cells. So when we eat food, our gut cells produce GLP-1, and it's also produced in our brain stems. And this hormone goes to the hypothalamus and locks on. And when it locks on the hypothalamus, we get the emotional state of, I don't want any more food. I really don't fancy anymore. I'm full up. I just do. So there's a lot of studies with this, because the people who were getting the hormone GLP-1 for their type 2 diabetes were losing weight, and they were losing a lot of weight. So that was why it was noticed, and not just a couple of kilos, they were losing a lot. So they've discovered that this hypothalamus is extremely important related to weight problems. So the thyroid is definitely part of that, because the hypothalamus has to send the messages to the pituitary, then to the thyroid. So there's something going on there. But I think we'll find that it also has its own very central role. But it's new. It's sort of the latest things, but it's very, very interesting. So a hormone that we produce in a gut and in a brain, in a brainstem, actually affect how much we eat.
Yes, and for our audience, as you probably know, as I've talked about, I had 28 years full-time experience in natural healing, and I make videos that I put on YouTube for free to help everybody. And I have videos on YouTube on how to reset your hypothalamus, how to reset your pituitary gland, how to reset your pineal gland. Because again, so many of us, we live in a chronic state of unrelenting, full-on stress. And it causes different parts of our brain to shut down or stop working optimally. And so I'll include in our YouTube notes the links on how to reset your hypothalamus and how to reset your pituitary, because there's little things you can do every day. Now, Sally Walker, we're talking about how to heal our thyroid naturally. Now, again, if somebody realizes that they may have a problem with their thyroid, what are the best tests to ask their doctor for?
Well, the ones I've suggested, the blood tests is what you will get from your doctor, even from the endocrinologist. So the TSH, the T4 now, and the T3 would be great if you can get them to do it. So, but you need, when we measure the hormone levels, so the T4 and the T3 are the hormones, then we need to ask for the free values of these hormones. So these hormones are bound to proteins. This is a way we can control how much of it is going to work. So the bound proteins, that will be the total amount of hormones, if you like. So we don't want the total, we want the portion which is free. Okay, so the free T4 and the free T3 are the ones that you would like to ask for. The doctor will measure the TSH, will probably also measure the free T4, but it's a challenge to get them to measure the free TSH, the free T3. But as you were talking about, there is another hormone, the reverse T3. No doctors measured this. This again is something that you would have to do privately. Unfortunately, I lived in Denmark for many years, and it's not even in the Danish handbook for the doctors. It's not even in there. so you know, they would never measure it because they wouldn't know how to interpret it. So that will be a private testing. As I said, you can go further. So you could test the urine levels of your iodine. You will also test the urine levels of some of the heavy metals, which we know can have a negative effect on the thyroid. Mercury especially, but some of the others, lead and cadmium, etc. So you could do a full profile of this. So you're moving from just getting a picture of how it's functioning with the hormones to what maybe is causing the imbalance when you're measuring the iodine, when you're measuring the heavy metals, etc. So there are lots of things to do, but to start with, you just would like to know, how much hormone am I producing, really?
Okay, great answer. And I like the idea of also testing for factors that may be interfering with your thyroid function, which brings me to my next question. So here we are on the Natural Healing Show, and people may be thinking, yeah, I know I've got a problem. Just tell me what to do. So someone realizes that they're hypothyroid. Let's kind of break it down. First of all, what are some of the dietary steps that they need to take if they're hypothyroid?
Well, I would say one of the important things is to make sure you have enough iodine. So if you don't have enough iodine, you will not be able to make these hormones. So the T4 and the T3, the numbers are telling you how much iodine, or how many molecules of iodine that are in the hormones, so combined with the thyroxine. So in the 4, there's 4 molecules of iodine, and in the 3, there's 3. So if you are iodine deficient, which is a big cause of hypothyroidism, but not necessarily in our world or in the first world, but in second world countries can be a problem. But if you're iodine deficient, you've got to get enough iodine. So there is a little bit of a challenge here related to the absorption of iron, okay? Iodine.
Yes.
Of iodine, yeah. So the absorption of iodine is very much affected negatively by plant compounds. So if you are eating raw broccoli especially, or raw greens of cabbage family, they will contain certain molecules which will actually affect the absorption of iodine into your thyroid gland, not into your, from the gut. They may also do it there, but they will affect it getting into your thyroid gland. So if you like juicing, and there's lots of people that like juicing,
Yeah.
this may be the cause of your low iodine, which may be the cause of your low thyroid. So that's an easy one to start with, isn't it? So avoid the juices, avoid eating broccoli in its raw state, make sure you're cooking it, to see if that does make any difference. But measuring iodine levels would be a good thing to do as well, to see if it is. Sometimes we see the goiter, the enlarged thyroid, and this could be an indication that you are low iodine. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely can be an indication. And other things I would, sorry.
And I want to interrupt because, Sally, can you explain for our audience, because there's an iodine self-test that you can do where you put iodine on your skin. Can you explain that for our audience?
Yes, absolutely. So you can buy these little bottles of iodine. And I don't know if the listeners remember, but we used to use iodine as a disinfectant to clean sores, and in operations, they would use it in the operation rooms where you'd be covered in all this yellow color from the iodine. So that's what you do. You buy a little bottle of the iodine, and you take sort of the inside of your elbow, and you cover sort of an area about 1 inch or 2 square with some iodine, and you keep an eye on it and see how long it lasts. So if you still have a nice yellow square after 24 hours, then you're not iodine deficient. But if your little yellow square disappears within the hour, then you are seriously deficient. So the longer you have the little yellow square, the less likely it is that you need iodine. Basically, that's.
And then share with us more about dietary strategies. I would say it's a huge mistake to be a vegan or a vegetarian if you've got thyroid problems, because can you explain why your thyroid needs iron and it needs meat? Can you explain about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that vegans and vegetarians are possibly more likely to be eating lots of broccoli, aren't they, as well? So that's not going to be good for the iodine. But yeah, so the conversion of T4 to 3 requires nutrients, and zinc is an important one, iron is an important one, selenium is an important one, and vitamin A is an important one, and even vitamin D is important. So the best sources of all these things, and in particular iron, is something which has got blood in it, or something is coming from an animal source. So animal foods are very important for thyroid health. Another negative related to possibly the vegan and vegetarians are that they tend to eat more plant foods which potentially have what we call anti-nutrients in them. So the phytates, the oxalates, and all these things, especially if the plant foods are raw. And that can also upset the absorption of nutrients in the gut, can upset the absorption into the thyroid. And then you've got a plant anti-nutrient called gluten.
Yes.
Yes, and gluten seems to be a trigger, definitely, for the autoimmunes, and it can go either way, hypo. And again, vegans, vegetarians possibly get more gluten because they're eating more of the grains, more of that type of food. And I have seen so many times that if my clients stop eating the gluten, that their thyroid starts to function better.
Yes, I 100% agree that if you've got any thyroid problem, you really want to go gluten-free. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't mean you have to go no carb or low carb. There's plenty of ways to get healthy carbohydrates, but definitely get off gluten. All right.
Yeah.
So now we've talked, any other dietary strategies that you would recommend for hypothyroid?
I mean, I would also say watch your carbs. So if you have weight issues, maybe fundamentally it's the thyroid, but because you're storing fat, then the hormone insulin has got to be involved in some way. So you maybe want to be a little bit careful of the carbs that you're eating. So going on a lower type of carbohydrate diet, and especially if you're past menopause, because the drop in estrogen has a negative effect on the insulin. So it's easier for us to store fat after menopause. It's easier for us to become type 2 diabetic. So watching your carbohydrate, I would say, is very important. Protein, so we could say that the thyroxine is the protein part. So getting enough protein is going to be very important, because you need an amino acid called tyrosine, which is not officially an essential amino acid, but the one it's made from is an essential amino acid. So you want to make sure you're getting protein. And if you are above the age of 45, 50, then your need for protein actually increases, because the studies are very clear that if you're getting about 1.5 up to 2 grams per kilo body weight, you have less risk of getting osteoporosis and something called sarcopenia, which is muscle loss. So you want to make sure that you're getting enough protein. So for most ladies, it's going to be around the 25-30 grams per meal of protein. So that's important too.
Now, what about lifestyle advice for hypothyroid? I feel it's critical that people do something literally every day to lower their stress, whether it's prayer and meditation or gentle yoga or walking in nature. What are your thoughts on that, Sally Walker?
I absolutely agree. Stress is an enormous component of this low thyroid problem, both in instigating it, but also making it worse, really. So yes, anything that you can do to decrease your stress or decrease your levels of cortisol, kind of thing. And I think awareness is the first thing. So why are you stressed? What is it? Is it a physical stress? Are you working too late? Are you working too many hours? That kind of thing. Or is it an emotional stress? Do you have a load of stuff going on that you need to resolve, you need to release in some way? And then once you become aware of what is the cause of your stress, then seek help. Get the help that you need to change the physical part of it, or the emotional part of it. And part of the physical part can actually be overtraining. And I see a lot of people that overtrain. Mm-hmm. My favorite tool to help people with their stress levels, and it is not necessarily going to help the emotional side of things, not directly, but the physical side of things. So my favorite tool is making my clients aware of that cortisol production has a natural 24-hour cycle, and we should have a very high production first thing in the morning. So if we're waking up, most people are beginning to wake around 6-ish, 7 o'clock. And then we should see a dramatic increase in cortisol. So within 30 minutes, your cortisol level should be the highest that they're going to be in the day. And then it drops reasonably quickly as well, and it'll be low for the rest of the day until the next day. Now that high increase is something called cortisol awakening response. And that is essential for our immune system, and especially the autoimmune part of it. So if you have a low CAR, as we call it, then you are going to set yourself up for autoimmune problems. So that could be a part of the problem as well. But in general, what I say to people, between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., you can be as active as you want and you may eat. From 6 p.m. until 6 a.m., you must be resting and fasting. And the more you can do that, and people go crazy, they say, oh my goodness, I don't finish work until 7 or all this kind of thing. So I'm just saying, as much as possible, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. activity, eating, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., resting, fasting. And the more you can do this, many of these things begin to resolve. But it's not easy in the world we've created.
Great advice. Now let's move on and talk about natural treatments for people who are hyperthyroid. The great people. Yeah.
So hypothyroid, now many of you listening might think, oh, it must be great, you could eat anything, you don't put on weight. Believe me, you do not want to be hypothyroid. It is literally life-threatening. It is dangerous, and the docs do pick up on it relatively quickly and need to bring it under control. So unfortunately, because it can be life-threatening, there can be medication which is necessary. There can there's all kinds of radioactive iodines and surgeries and all kinds of things that can be involved here. But if it is an autoimmune situation, then for some of you that can focus and you can calm this down, and definitely by removing the gluten will have the first step. And I do know some clients which have gone the natural way, but it's not easy. And you don't want to be messing around. You need to be aware of the dangers of having a hyperthyroid. And if you can't control it yourself, if you can't resolve it the natural way, then you must seek medical help. It is dangerous. I do want to emphasize that. But with that said, I do have clients that by changing their diets, absolutely, so removing gluten, removing maybe some of the other proteins which can be negative, it could be the dairies, it might even be the egg. So going on some kind of restrictive diet, maybe initially very restrictive, and then trying to reintroduce things. I would also, with hypos and hypers, but especially with hypers, I would have a lot of look at the gut health, the gut wall. They might have what we call leaky gut. That might be the cause. So you want to make sure you're healing the gut as well, or focusing on that, which will also help the thyroid. But as I said, it is dangerous.
I'm so happy that you brought up gut health, Sally Walker, hormone and slow age expert, because 70% of inflammation begins in your gut. So if you've got pain anywhere in your body, you have inflammation. And when your body's inflamed, your cortisol level will go up. So you may be listening and think, I'm not that stressed. My life is pretty steady. But if you've got chronic uncontrolled inflammation because of unresolved gut issues, then your cortisol is going to be too high, and you're going to be experiencing the whole gamut of degenerative diseases of aging, including osteoporosis, arthritis, thyroiditis. Any illness ending in itis is from inflammation. So Sally Walker, hormone and slow age experts, could you sort of summarize for our audience some natural steps that we can all take to ensure that our thyroid stays healthy as we age?
So the first thing I would say is check that 24-hour cycle. So try to live after that as much as possible. So maybe a couple of days a week, you get to do the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. where you're active and eating, and then you get the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. where you're resting and fasting. Maybe you can do that twice a week. Hey, it's better than never doing it. So don't look at the the piece of paper and say, oh God, I can't do that, never, 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 but because maybe you can, and your body is amazing. It will be so grateful for the small things. So I think that's an important thing. I think diet is also very, very important. So be careful with raw plant foods. I'm very much against raw plant foods. I'm not against plant foods or not against veggies per se, but be very careful if they are raw, because there are a lot of anti-nutrients. So we should be, cooking things, maybe fermenting things and all this kind of thing. So looking at gut health, which is absolutely central for everything in the body, but especially also the thyroid. So increasing your gut health. Now, my favorite tool for this is bone broth.
Yes, wonderful. Now, we've been listening to the fabulous Sally Walker, hormone and slow age expert, who's a beautiful example of her own excellent work. You can find out more about Sally Walker and her wonderful work at her website, sally-walker.com. My name is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. And you can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and also unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. And remember, if you have thyroid problems, you've gone to a doctor who's identified them, there are things that you can do to heal your thyroid naturally. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.